The Premier League title race looks to be shaping up very nicely as we get through this critical winter period, but it looks as though there's an extra team in play that was not expected to be there ahead of the season. Let's get into it. Coming into the season, I think there were massive expectations on Mikel Arteta's Arsenal to finally go after and get their hands on that coveted Premier League title that they have been chasing for so long, particularly under this manager who for over 6 years now, has been building towards, I think, the very moment they are in right now, where they sit at the top of the Premier League at Christmas time. They've looked the best team in the league, and I think that's not in any question. But I think the form of other sides in the league has maybe brought in or snuck in a few little doubts about as to whether this Arsenal side can truly show the steel of a Premier League champion that they have yet to show under Mikel Arteta. Particularly over the last few seasons where Arsenal have truly grown into title contenders at the very least. They have definitely shown periods of serious title winning form, but fell apart at the last hurdle or were just pipped by an in fact better Manchester City side under Pep Guardiola, who we will get onto in this video. But just taking a look at Arsenal's form this season and as to why it feels different. They've only lost once in the last 22 games in all competitions. They've only lost twice all season. But I think it's their defensive quality this season that has really set them apart so far in 25-26. Where perhaps other sides have shown more exciting quality and talent in the attacking areas of the pitch. It has been the likes of Gabriel and William Saliba. David Raya has been arguably the best goalkeeper in the Premier League this season. They've conceded the least goals in the competition, the least goals per match. They have got the most clean sheets, and it just feels that defensive solidarity that they have shown, particularly with the cover. You've got to remember they've been without the likes of Saliba and Gabriel at times this season. They have had to bring in Piero Hincapié and Christian Mosquera, who have both looked really comfortable for Mikel Arteta at centre-half. I think it shows the quality of their recruitment in the summer, but more so that defensive quality that they have just shown so much superiority in this season. And it is something that I think will have to lead them forward going into the second half of the campaign. I think the biggest criticism of Arsenal so far this season, if there are any, has been perhaps their performances in the attacking third, where they haven't been sparkling to say the least or that thrilling to watch. But what they have been is efficient. Now, we can look to the numbers in terms of their attacking players. Victor Gyökeres hasn't quite had the most consistent start to life in the capital. Bukayo Saka hasn't quite got the numbers that he has in past seasons. Eberechi Eze, whilst he's had his moments in an Arsenal shirt, hasn't quite hit consistent heights. But what I would say to that is, I don't think they need to be at this moment in time. I think we've seen with Arsenal over the last few seasons, when they have been in title contention, they have perhaps peaked too early and perhaps got to a level too early on in the season. And I know that sounds strange, but we've learned from Manchester City over the past few years that they just bided their time and waited for the run-in when it's March onwards, when it truly counts and when they really need to get into that stride. One thing for me is, and I think Mikel Arteta has learned from past experiences, and I think he will try to hold this Arsenal team back just a little in the attacking sense. But I think the problem is for me, or a potential issue maybe, is in their performances against the bigger sides, where we've seen them lose at Anfield earlier on in the season, and I think a disappointing performance against Manchester City at the Emirates, where they managed to grab a late point thanks to Gabriel Martinelli. I think that is truly where we will need to see an Arsenal side who are assertive and dominant, because they are the best team in the league, at least so far, and they have to prove it in those bigger games in the second half of the season. Moving on to Manchester City now, who I think have surprised a few people, including myself, in all honesty, that they look to be in title contention this season. And I think it sounds crazy to say that, considering whoever doubts against Pep Guardiola, particularly after a difficult campaign, perhaps his most difficult campaign as a manager, it always makes them look like a fool at the end of the season, considering his dominance wherever he has been. But it looks as though he has found a formula this season with this Manchester City side, this revolutionised Manchester City side, who we have seen take on perhaps a different style and a different approach to games, perhaps less of that possession-based style and complete control, and we've seen more of an all-action Manchester City side with new additions and players who have refound their form. And I think if we look at the likes of Phil Foden, who looks to be enjoying his football again and looks back to his sparkling best, Jeremy Doku has been one of the most impressive forward players in the Premier League this season. And I don't think we can leave out Erling Haaland, who again is just hitting record numbers in the Premier League and could be on set to break his own record for goals in a Premier League season. I think this will perhaps play on the mind of Mikel Arteta and Arsenal, who, don't get me wrong, as I've mentioned in the previous bit of the video, will be confident and should be. They are the best team in the league across the pitch, and in all departments I feel they are covered everywhere. But where Manchester City do have the edge is in an attacking sense, is going forward, where I think they just have more of that killer quality in the final third. I think Ryan Cherky over the past few games has really started to show his individual brilliance on either foot. He can strike from distance, he can link, he can cross. He's got that vision, he's got that little creative maverick ability that I think Arsenal perhaps haven't had so far this season, with the likes of Bukayo Saka and Ebrahim Eze, who do have similar qualities in that sense. But I think Manchester City will be encouraged by just being 2 points behind the leaders at this stage. Now, where Arsenal have the edge defensively, I think Manchester City certainly do going forward. As I've just touched on, those attacking players and that attacking quality that they have at their disposal, if they can keep them all fit relatively heading into that final period of the season where it truly matters, and if they're still in touch with Arsenal and they've not let that lead extend too much, I think it will be a period where Manchester City can rely on that experience that they've got and rely on those experienced bodies across the pitch like Ruben Dias, and you could even include Erling Haaland in that now, having picked up 2 Premier League titles of his own with Pep Guardiola. But they've got the most goals in the Premier League. I think they've created the most chances. Erling Haaland, of course, leads the way for Premier League goals, and ultimately he will be the difference maker if City are going to go on to win another league title. But I think with Manchester City, I think a problem for me going into the season was defensively, and I'll be honest, again, they've proved me wrong in that sense. I think Josko Gvardiol has been a revelation at centre-half, I think, in his actual position, whereas in past seasons he's been playing at full-back. I think Ruben Dias has been in good form and a leader for Manchester City, and I think obviously Donnarumma has been exceptional since he's coming from PSG. But I think, could there be any issues on the horizon for City? Ironically, in the past where City have bided their time in title races, took their foot off the gas a little bit and not quite hit their best level in these months, for example, from August to December, they've always managed to find that fire in March rather, where they can just steamroll through the league and really hit that quality and that level, that consistent level, that exceptional level that we have seen so often from Pep Guardiola. But one thing that may just be different this time around, I think the question could be, are they clicking too early? Are they hitting a period of form where it would replicate that title winning form in March and April, whereas they're hitting it this season in December. And don't get me wrong, it's an important period of the season, but that could just be a little question where Manchester City do look more impressive going forward and more, I think the performances are more convincing. But I think where Arsenal have learned from past seasons, I think Manchester City maybe are just hitting that height too early. And could that be something that does hold them back as we get into those later months? Now let's talk about the dark horses in this title race who have seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Aston Villa were really struggling at the start of the season, not just to pick up points, but to score goals under Unai Emery. But 10 consecutive victories in all competitions. It's the first time they've done so in over a century. Morgan Rogers looks to have picked up the form of his life over the past few weeks. 2 consecutive braces in the Premier League against West Ham and at the weekend against Manchester United. 2 special goals in that win in particular. But here's why I think Aston Villa will have to be near on perfect to go toe-to-toe with Arsenal and Manchester City. Aston Villa are no scrubs, and they've got a real squad full of quality across the pitch, a really strong spine. If you look at the likes of Martinez, Ezri Konsa, Yuri Tielemans and Kamara in midfield, Morgan Rogers now looks to be really becoming that player of consistency and quality for Villa, that star man who could be the difference maker if they are to go on to make a shock challenge for the Premier League this season. But we talk about title winning form, and Aston Villa have not lost a game since the start of November. It's been a really impressive run. But I think for me, the difference will be with the manager who, in Unai Emery, I think has the credentials, the experience in those big games to go head to head with Arteta and Guardiola. 3 Spaniards could potentially be heading for a 3-way title race here. But I think with the problem I have with Aston Villa, and again, it's a pretty simple reason, I just don't think they can match the other 2 squads for quality and in terms of the depth from the bench. I think especially if you look at Arsenal's squad, the depth in quality they have all over the pitch for each position is frankly frightening. It's a bit reminiscent of Manchester City over the last decade or so under Pep Guardiola. But I think if they are really to make a run for that Premier League, I think Unai Emery will be the guy to make the difference. I think some have pointed to Rodgers, and I think, don't get me wrong, they will need that star guy, that one to look to when they need something, like he did against Manchester United at Villa Park. But I think Emery will be the guy to make the difference. I think what Emery is doing with this squad, particularly having had a poor summer window where I think a lot of people, again including myself, thought it would be a big problem for this manager this season, not having recruited and built on a really impressive few seasons where they've been in consistent European contention. And it even looks now that they could be ready to make that next step, even without any major summer business. I think a particular issue for me with this Aston Villa side, and again, they're going to look to Rodgers, who looks like he's becoming that star player, even at a youngish age. I think he's 23 still. I think is the form of Ollie Watkins, and I think if you are to be a title challenger, you really do need that forward who's going to be a consistent goal getter. Now, again, people may say, well, Rodgers has been that guy. Well, if we actually look at the facts this season, Rodgers hasn't been that consistent in terms of his output. He's only scored 2 braces consecutively, but before that, he had only scored 3 times in the Premier League. Before that, I think that would have been in the previous 15 Premier League appearances. So I think that could be a potential issue. Watkins just has not hit the form that he has been able to over the last 2 seasons under Unai Emery. I think, though, again, they're looking at a really tough end to 2025. They've got trips to the Emirates and Stamford Bridge coming up to end out the calendar year. And I think that could give us a real indication of where Aston Villa truly are. I think the squad is good. And like I said, they've got a really strong spine. And I think if they can keep everyone fit in that squad, in that first team 11, sorry, then they've got a real shot at making a run in the second half of the season. And they will have to be there in those March and April months. But I think for me, Villa will just fall short. But they're definitely dangerous and they're definitely dark horses in this Premier League title race.